Hello everybody, I hope we're keeping safe and well. Today we're going to be making some shortbread biscuits together. First things first, we need to wash our hands with lots of soap so that they are nice and clean. Then we're going to get our equipment out. First we need some scales to measure our ingredients with. Some mixing bowls. I've got two different size ones, but it doesn't matter as long as all of the mix will fit in. Then we need 2 baking trays and some greaseproof paper to line them. If you've not got greaseproof paper, then don't worry, butter works just as well. A sieve and a rolling pin. If you've not got a rolling pin, a heavy bottle will work just as well. Some caster sugar, some plain flour, and a block of butter that has been out of the fridge for a while. If you've not got a block of butter, then margarine will work fine too. You also need a knife, some cookie cutters, but if you've not got cookie cutters, then don't worry too much. You can also use the rim of a glass that's been floured, or you can cut them into shapes that you would like. At certain times, you'll also need an adult helper. This is to help you with things like the oven and knives because they can be dangerous. First, we are going to take our baking trays and line them with the greaseproof paper. This is to make sure that the biscuits don't stick. You may want to ask an adult to help you with the scissors as they can be rather sharp. Fold the greaseproof paper out. You may need to flip it over if it's particularly curly. Smooth it out, tuck it under, and then it's ready to have your biscuits on them. Now we're going to weigh out all of our ingredients. Firstly, you need your plain flour. Make sure that your scales are set to 0 grams every time. You need 150 grams of plain flour. You may find it easier to shake the flour out or use a spoon. I ended up using a spoon in the end because it just took too long to come out of the tub. So I'm watching the numbers really carefully to make sure that they don't go over. So I've got them to 150 grams there. And then I'm going to tip it into the bigger bowl. I'm going to tip it through using a sieve. This is to make sure that there are no lumps or clumps of flour in the mixture because that can make it not taste very nice. If you don't have a sieve, get a fork and run the fork through the flour in the bowl just to make sure that there's no big lumps. It should look lovely and fine like it does in my bowl. Next I'm going to put the small bowl back on the scales. It needs to be set back to 0. And I'm going to take the golden caster sugar. Again, it's probably easier to use a spoon to measure this out with. This is to make sure that it doesn't spill everywhere. This recipe can get quite messy and we don't want to make too much of a mess right at the start. So we need 50 grams of sugar. I've put a little bit too much in there, so I'm going to take a bit out using my spoon to make sure it's spot on. And then I'm going to add it to the flour. The bowl goes back on the scales, set to 0. And now for the butter. You may want an adult's help here. I'm going to take a knife and cut the butter into small chunks. This will make it easier for when you're mixing, so I take a chunk. Now, once you've took a bigger chunk, you can either choose to cut it like I did here, then place it in the bowl to be measured. In the end, I ended up just using my fingers to rip it up with because it's far quicker and far easier. We need 100 grams of butter. So I'm watching the scales really carefully to make sure that I don't go over, because it's quite hard to stick the butter back together if you've already ripped it up. So I've got all my small chunks of butter in that small bowl now. A little bit more. And just a smidge more. And I'm there. So then I'm going to add this into the larger bowl. Then I've got all my ingredients together. So next up we're going to get our hands all messy now in the bowl. And we're going to crumble it between our fingers. Ooh, the mix feels really gooey, doesn't it? So we're going to smush the butter up into the flour and try and get it to the consistency of breadcrumbs. This does take a little while. So as you can see, it sticks to your fingers. Maybe try describing to your adult that's helping you how it feels. I would say it feels gooey and squidgy. What does it smell like? I think it smells really yummy already. So I'm going to keep going, keep smushing. So I decided to speed this bit up for you because you don't want to sit around watching me smush the mix together all day. You can see now that the mix is starting to come together to a dough-like consistency. This means it's all sticking together really nicely. You could almost make a ball out of it. So you can choose to add things to your mix. I've chosen to split the mix in half, and I'll have half with some leftover Easter chocolate, and the other half I'm just going to keep plain. But you could add some dried fruit like raisins to yours. You could add a bit of vanilla flavouring, orange flavouring or lemon flavouring. There really is no limit, but sometimes just a plain one is just as lovely. I've added the chocolate chunks into one half of my mix and left the other half plain. You might want to ask an adult to help you break up the chocolate because it can sometimes be a bit tricky. Now I'm adding a tiny splash of water to each mix, and I'm going to stir it round with my hands to bind the mix together. Binding means that it should stick together in a nice ball so that we can roll it out and make our biscuit shapes. You can see here the plain mix is sticking together really nicely and it's almost leaving the bowl clean behind. I'm going to do the same for the chocolate mix too. Any bits that are on your hands or left behind in the bowl, just use the dough to stick it together with. This bit does tend to get quite messy. Here I go again with the chocolate mix. And I squash it together between my hands. Oh, it does feel funny, doesn't it? I've moved my bowls to the side for this next bit because I need a bit of space on my worktop. I've shook some flour out. This is the same flour that we used earlier. It is called plain flour. I'm going to spread it out using my hands and then rub some onto the rolling pin. It is quite messy using all this flour, isn't it? By rubbing the flour onto the rolling pin, it should stop it sticking as much. I'm going to take the ball of dough, press it out gently and cover it in flour. This will stop it from sticking to the worktop. I'm gently now rolling out the dough, very softly. I'm going to keep moving the dough so that it doesn't stick to the top. Pressing it out as I go. It does stick to the rolling pin sometimes. If this happens and you get a little tear, it's okay, just squash it back together. And any bits that come off onto the rolling pin or on your hands or fly off onto the worktop somewhere else, just stick back on. You can see I've picked some off my fingers here that have stuck. It is a sticky dough. It can sometimes be handy to have a spatula with you. This can help you get it off the worktop when the dough gets a bit bigger. I'm using my spatula now to unstick it anywhere that it may have stuck to the worktop. You might want an adult to help you here because it's quite fiddly. I'm just pushing together any cracks that may have appeared. Now I'm taking my cookie cutter. I've used a round one here. If you don't have a cookie cutter, you can use the top of a glass or just cut the dough using a blunt knife into shapes. I'm wiggling the cutter round so that it forms a lovely circle shape. And then I'm picking it up. You can choose to pick it up with your hands and then place it onto your baking sheet, like so. I've used the tool to speed this up again because you don't want to see me doing it a million times over. So once I've cut a few shapes out, I'm squashing the dough back together to make a ball and then getting as many cookies out of it as I can. I've then moved on to the chocolate dough. I'm going to do exactly the same as I did before, but this time I've chosen to use a star shape. You can use any shape that you'd like. We don't want to waste any dough, so I'm squashing it back up into a ball and then placing it onto the sheet with the. Here are my biscuits on the trays, ready for the next step. So now I've put the baking trays down and we're going to add some sugar to the top. I'm using a small teaspoon and the same caster sugar that we used earlier, and I'm sprinkling a small amount onto the top of each one. You can add as much or as little sugar as you like. I'm adding a bit more to the plain ones to make them slightly sweet, and I'll add a little bit less to the chocolate ones. I'm just sprinkling them out, trying to get it as even as possible. This is a fiddly job. How might you describe the sugar as it falls onto the biscuit? It almost looks like snow, doesn't it? Here I am with the chocolate ones, adding slightly less sugar to these because the chocolate inside is already very sweet. And now I'm going to tap the sugar in gently so that it doesn't fall off the top when we move the trays. Now I'm going to put both trays into the fridge to chill them. They are going to stay here for 20 minutes. It is okay to put both trays on top of each other because they're already flat. They won't fall over whilst they're in the fridge. Whilst the biscuits chill for 20 minutes, I'm going to quickly wash up everything that I've used to make the biscuits and wipe everywhere down. It's always important to tidy up after the mess that you make. Why not start to have a chat with your adult and anybody else at home about what you think the biscuits might taste like? Now the 20 minutes are over, I've put them in the oven and these need to go in for another 20 minutes. Ask an adult to help you here because the oven is hot, hot, hot. While they cook, I decided to play with Winnie out in the garden.
Minutes later.
The cookies have now came out of the oven. You must ask an adult to help you get them out. They now need to cool down for 10 minutes before putting them onto a plate. And here are my 2 flavours of shortbread. I hope yours turned out just as yummy. Here's me with mine. Why not send your class teacher a photo of you with your biscuits or you and your family making them? Why not try and draw some of the ingredients and equipment that you've used? You could even write a recipe for your shortbread or teach the recipe to somebody else in your house. But most importantly, enjoy! We'll see you very soon and stay safe.